neon lights of the carnival cast an eerie glow across the fairgrounds as I made my way through the bustling crowd. The air was thick with the scent of cotton candy and popcorn, but there was something else lingering beneath, a hint of foreboding that I couldn't quite shake. I'd always been skeptical of fortune tellers, but tonight, something drew me towards the weathered purple tent at the far end of the midway. As I pushed aside the heavy velvet curtain, the smell of incense engulfed me. Sitting behind a small table draped in midnight blue silk was an old woman, her wrinkled face partially obscured by a colorful headscarf. Her eyes, sharp and knowing, locked onto mine the moment I entered. "I've been expecting you," she said, her voice low and raspy. I felt a chill run down my spine but brushed it off as theatrical nonsense. Hesitantly, I took a seat across from her. The fortune teller's gnarled hands hovered over a deck of tarot cards. As she began to lay them out, her expression grew increasingly troubled. The atmosphere in the tent seemed to thicken, and I found myself leaning forward, inexplicably drawn into her performance. "A great danger approaches," she whispered, her eyes widening. "The carnival holds the key, but beware. What you seek may be your undoing." I left the tent feeling unsettled but determined to shake off the fortune teller's words. It was all just part of the act, right? But as I made my way home that night, strange things began to happen. Streetlights flickered and went out as I passed beneath them, plunging me into momentary darkness. The wind picked up, carrying with it the faint sound of carnival music, though I was miles away from the fairgrounds. When I finally reached my apartment, I fumbled with my keys, my hands shaking inexplicably. As I pushed open the door, a gust of wind rushed past me, slamming it shut. I spun around, heart pounding, only to find myself face to face with my own reflection in the hallway mirror. For a split second, I could have sworn I saw something else, a dark, shadowy figure looming behind me. I tried to laugh it off, blaming my overactive imagination and the fortune teller's suggestive warnings. But as the days passed, the strange occurrences only intensified. Objects in my apartment would move on their own, always when my back was turned. I'd wake up in the middle of the night to the sound of Calliope music, only for it to fade away as soon as I became fully conscious. At work, my colleagues began to comment on my haggard appearance. Dark circles formed under my eyes as sleep became increasingly elusive. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw flashes of the carnival, twisted, nightmarish versions of the rides and attractions. A week after my visit to the fortune teller, I received a package. There was no return address, just my name scrawled in spidery handwriting. With trembling fingers, I opened it to find a single carnival ticket inside. The date was for exactly 1 month from the night I'd had my fortune told. That's when the dreams started. Every night I found myself back at the carnival, but it was different, darker, more sinister. The once cheerful rides creaked ominously, their metal structures twisting into grotesque shapes. Shadowy figures darted between the tents, their whispers echoing in my ears even after I woke up. During my waking hours, I became obsessed with researching the carnival's history. I discovered that it had been traveling the country for over a century, leaving a trail of mysterious disappearances in its wake. People who visited the fortune teller often reported strange experiences afterward, but most accounts ended abruptly, as if the writers had simply vanished. As the date on the ticket drew nearer, my paranoia grew. I started seeing carnival workers everywhere. A clown on the subway, a juggler in the park, a contortionist bending impossibly as she walked down the street. But whenever I looked again, they were gone, leaving me to question my own sanity. The night before the fated date arrived, I made a desperate decision. I had to confront whatever was happening, to face the danger the fortune teller had warned me about. With the ticket clutched in my hand, I drove to the fairgrounds where the carnival had first appeared. As I approached, the familiar neon lights came into view, but they seemed dimmer now, pulsing with an unhealthy, sickly glow. The usual sounds of laughter and excitement were absent, replaced by an eerie silence broken only by the occasional creak of metal or whisper of wind through canvas. I made my way through the deserted midway, my footsteps echoing loudly on the packed dirt. Every shadow seemed to move, every reflection in the funhouse mirrors twisted into nightmarish shapes. I found myself in front of the fortune teller's tent once more. its purple fabric now faded and tattered. Taking a deep breath, I pushed aside the curtain and stepped inside. The old woman sat exactly as she had before, but now her eyes gleamed with an otherworldly light. "You've returned," she said, her voice resonating with power. "Are you prepared to learn the truth?" Before I could answer, the world around me began to shift and warp. The tent dissolved into swirling mists, and I felt myself falling, tumbling through space and time. When the mists cleared, I found myself standing in the center of the carnival, but it was unlike anything I had ever seen before. The rides and attractions pulsed with dark energy, revealing their true forms, portals to other dimensions, gateways to realms beyond human comprehension. The fortune teller appeared beside me, no longer an old woman, but a being of pure energy. "The carnival exists between worlds," she explained, her voice echoing in my mind. "It feeds on the essence of those who visit, growing stronger with each soul it claims. You were chosen to see the truth, to become part of something greater." As she spoke, I felt a pull, an irresistible urge to merge with the carnival itself. Part of me wanted to resist, to run away, but another part recognized the incredible power being offered. The fortune teller's warning hadn't been about danger, but about transformation. In that moment, I had to make a choice: to flee and live in fear, always looking over my shoulder, or to embrace this new reality and become something more than human. As the carnival's energy swirled around me, I made my decision. And now, as I stand here telling you this story, I invite you to visit our carnival. Step right up and let the fortune teller reveal your destiny. Who knows? You might just find yourself becoming part of something truly extraordinary. The choice, as it was for me, is yours to make. I've always loved carnivals. The lights, the sounds, the excitement, it's intoxicating. So when the traveling fair rolled into our small town, I was first in line. The smell of cotton candy and popcorn filled the air as I wandered through the fairgrounds, taking in the sights. That's when I saw it, the mirror maze. The colorful sign promised a challenge like no other, and I couldn't resist. I handed over my tickets and stepped inside, grinning at my distorted reflection in the first mirror. The maze seemed simple enough at first, just a series of twists and turns surrounded by reflective surfaces. I confidently strode forward, certain I'd be out in no time. But as I delved deeper, something changed. The carnival music outside faded away, replaced by an eerie silence. The mirrors seemed to stretch endlessly in every direction, and I found myself growing increasingly disoriented. I tried to retrace my steps, but every path looked the same. That's when I noticed it. A flicker of movement in one of the mirrors that didn't match my own. I froze, heart pounding. Slowly, I turned to face the mirror, and what I saw made my blood run cold. My reflection was smiling at me, but I wasn't smiling. It winked, and I stumbled backward, my mind reeling. This couldn't be happening. It had to be a trick of the light, some clever illusion. But deep down, I knew the truth. I was trapped in a nightmare, and it was just beginning. Panic set in as I frantically searched for an exit. My reflections multiplied around me, each one seeming more sinister than the last. They moved independently, mocking my fear with twisted grins and malevolent laughter that echoed through the maze. I ran, my hands outstretched, smacking into mirror after mirror as I desperately tried to find a way out. The air grew thick and oppressive, making it hard to breathe. Sweat trickled down my back as I spun in circles, trying to make sense of my surroundings. That's when I saw it. A dark figure lurking in the corner of one of the mirrors. It was tall and gaunt, with long, spindly fingers and eyes that glowed an unnatural red. I blinked and it was gone. But I could feel its presence, watching me, hunting me. I tried to call for help, but my voice came out as a strangled whisper. The maze seemed to be closing in, the mirrors bending and warping around me. Reality was slipping away, and I couldn't tell what was real anymore. In one mirror, I saw myself as a child, eyes wide with terror. In another, I was old and withered, reaching out with a gnarled hand. These weren't just reflections, they were possibilities, alternate versions of myself trapped in this hellish place. I realized with growing horror that if I didn't find a way out soon, I might become one of them, forever lost in this maze of mirrors. As I stumbled through the twisting passages, I began to notice strange symbols etched into some of the mirrors. They glowed faintly, pulsing with an otherworldly energy. I reached out to touch one, and a jolt of electricity shot through my body. Suddenly, memories that weren't my own flooded my mind. Other people who had been trapped here, their fear and desperation overwhelming me. I saw flashes of their fates, some driven to madness, others fading away until they became nothing more than reflections themselves. The realization hit me like a punch to the gut. This wasn't just a carnival attraction. It was something much older and more malevolent, a trap designed to feed on human suffering. The dark figure I had seen earlier appeared again, this time in multiple mirrors. It spoke, its voice a raspy whisper that seemed to come from everywhere at once. "Welcome to my domain," it hissed. "Your fear is delicious." I tried to run, but my feet felt like lead. The figure reached out, its fingers extending beyond the surface of the mirror, grasping at the air inches from my face. I screamed and fell backward, crashing into another mirror. To my shock, I fell through it, landing in a hidden passage behind the maze. For a moment, hope surged within me. Had I found a way out? But as I looked around, my heart sank. This area was different, darker, older, with mirrors that seemed to be made of polished obsidian. I had a sinking feeling that I had just stumbled into the heart of this nightmare. The hidden passage was a labyrinth of its own, twisting and turning in impossible ways. Gravity seemed to shift, and I found myself walking on walls and ceilings, my sense of direction completely lost. The obsidian mirrors showed me terrible things, apocalyptic visions of the future, nightmarish creatures that defied description, and worst of all, my own death played out in 100 different ways. I tried to close my eyes, to shut it all out, but the visions continued in my mind. It was as if the maze was burrowing into my subconscious, feeding on my deepest fears and darkest thoughts. I felt myself starting to forget who I was, my identity slipping away like sand through an hourglass. That's when I heard it, a faint, familiar sound cutting through the madness. It was the carnival music from outside, distant but unmistakable. It anchored me, giving me something to focus on. I took a deep breath and forced myself to think rationally. There had to be a way out. I just had to find it. I began to study the symbols I had seen earlier more closely. They seemed to form a pattern, a sort of map hidden in plain sight. With trembling fingers, I traced the symbols on the mirrors as I encountered them. Each time I completed a pattern, I heard a faint click, as if something was unlocking. Hope renewed, I pressed on, my fingertips bleeding from countless cuts as I frantically traced symbol after symbol. The dark figure appeared again, its red eyes blazing with fury. "No!" it shrieked. "You are mine!" But for the first time since entering this nightmare, I smiled. I was close. I could feel it. With a final, desperate swipe, I completed the last symbol. There was a tremendous crack, like the sound of a glacier splitting apart. The mirrors around me shattered, raining down in a glittering cascade. I covered my face, expecting to be cut to ribbons, but the shards passed through me like smoke. When I opened my eyes, I was standing outside the mirror maze, blinking in the bright sunlight. The carnival was in full swing around me, families laughing and children shouting with joy. For a moment, I thought it had all been a terrible dream. But then I saw my reflection in a nearby funhouse mirror, and for a split second, I saw the dark figure standing behind me, its red eyes gleaming. I ran, pushing through the crowds, not stopping until I was far away from the carnival. My hands were shaking as I examined them, expecting to see the cuts from the mirror shards. But my skin was unmarked. The only evidence of my ordeal was a small symbol, like a brand on the inside of my wrist, a final parting gift from the maze. I've never been back to a carnival since that day. The sound of Calliope music makes me break out in a cold sweat, and I avoid mirrors whenever possible. But sometimes, late at night, I swear I can hear whispers coming from my bathroom mirror, calling me back to that twisted dimension of reflections and terror. And I wonder, did I truly escape, or am I still there, trapped in the maze, just another lost soul thinking they've found their way out? I've always been fascinated by puppetry, so when I heard about the traveling carnival's renowned puppet show, I couldn't resist. That fateful night, I made my way through the bustling fairgrounds, the air thick with the scent of cotton candy and popcorn. As I approached the striped tent, an eerie silence fell over the area, a stark contrast to the cheerful chaos behind me. Inside, the dim lighting and musty smell set an unsettling atmosphere. I took my seat among the sparse crowd, all eyes fixed on the velvet curtains. As they parted, revealing an intricately designed miniature stage, I felt a chill run down my spine. The show began, and I was immediately captivated. The puppets were unlike anything I'd ever seen, their movements fluid and graceful, their expressions eerily human-like. The puppeteer, a tall, gaunt man in a top hat, manipulated the strings with unnatural precision. As the performance progressed, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. The puppets' eyes seemed to follow me, their gazes piercing and alive. I tried to rationalize it, telling myself it was just expert craftsmanship, but deep down I knew there was more to it. The other audience members appeared oblivious, clapping and cheering at each scene. But with each passing minute, my unease grew stronger, and I found myself inching towards the exit. Halfway through the show, I noticed something that made my blood run cold. One of the puppets, a young woman in a Victorian dress, had a small birthmark on her neck, identical to one I'd seen on a missing person poster in town earlier that day. My heart raced as I scanned the other puppets, recognizing features that matched other missing individuals. I tried to stay calm, not wanting to draw attention to myself. The puppeteer's eyes occasionally darted towards the audience, and I swore I saw a malevolent glint in them. I needed to leave, but I was paralyzed by fear and morbid curiosity. As the show reached its climax, the puppets' movements became more frantic, almost desperate. Their silent screams seemed to echo in my mind, and I could have sworn I saw tears glistening on their wooden cheeks. The puppeteer's fingers danced in the air, and with each twitch, the puppets contorted in ways that should have been impossible for inanimate objects. Unable to bear it any longer, I stood up abruptly, drawing curious glances from nearby spectators. As I stumbled towards the exit, I heard the puppeteer's voice, smooth as silk but laced with menace. "Leaving so soon? The best is yet to come." I didn't look back, pushing through the heavy canvas flaps and into the cool night air. Once outside, I gasped for breath, my mind reeling from what I'd witnessed. I knew I had to do something, but who would believe such an outlandish story? Determined to uncover the truth, I spent the next few days investigating the carnival. I discovered that it had a dark history, leaving a trail of missing persons in every town it visited. Armed with this information, I decided to return to the puppet show, this time prepared to expose the sinister puppeteer. As I snuck into the tent after hours, the silence was deafening. Moonlight filtered through gaps in the canvas, casting eerie shadows across the empty seats. I made my way to the stage, my flashlight beam dancing across the lifeless puppets hanging from their hooks. Up close, their features were even more disturbingly realistic. Suddenly, I heard a creaking sound behind me. Whirling around, I came face to face with the puppeteer, his eyes glowing an unnatural shade of green in the darkness. "Curious little thing, aren't you?" he hissed, a cruel smile playing on his lips. "Perhaps you'd like a closer look at my craft." Before I could react, he raised his hands, and I felt an invisible force wrap around my limbs. To my horror, I realized I couldn't control my own movements. The puppeteer laughed, a chilling sound that echoed through the empty tent. "You see," he explained, his voice dripping with malice, "true art requires sacrifice. These puppets? They're not wood and string, but flesh and bone, their souls bound to my will." As he spoke, I felt my consciousness being pushed aside, replaced by an overwhelming presence. I tried to scream, but no sound came out. My body began to move of its own accord, my joints bending at unnatural angles as I danced to the puppeteer's twisted tune. For what felt like an eternity, I was trapped in my own body, a prisoner in my mind as the puppeteer used me in his performances. Night after night, I would dance and act alongside the other human puppets, our silent screams hidden behind painted smiles. The audience, oblivious to our plight, applauded our lifelike movements, never suspecting the horror behind the spectacle. During the day, we hung limply from our hooks, fully conscious but unable to move or speak. I watched helplessly as new victims were brought in, their eyes wide with terror as the puppeteer worked his dark magic on them. Each time, I relived my own transformation, feeling their pain and despair as if it were my own. As days turned into weeks, I began to lose hope. The constant strain on my body and mind was unbearable, and I could feel my sense of self slipping away. But just as I was about to give in completely, I noticed something. A slight weakness in the puppeteer's control during the moments between shows. Clinging to this glimmer of hope, I focused all my remaining willpower on those brief instances of freedom. Slowly, painstakingly, I began to resist the magical strings that bound me. It was excruciating, like trying to move through molasses, but I refused to give up. With each passing day, I gained a little more control, biding my time until I could make my move. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, I saw my chance. The puppeteer, overconfident in his power, had let his guard down during a particularly elaborate performance. In that crucial moment, I summoned every ounce of strength I had left and broke free from his control. The sudden resistance caught him off guard, and I saw a flicker of fear in his eyes. Taking advantage of his momentary weakness, I lunged forward, tackling him to the ground. The audience gasped, thinking it was part of the show, but the other puppets knew better. As the puppeteer's concentration broke, they too began to shake off his influence. Soon, the stage was in chaos as former puppets attacked their captor. In the ensuing struggle, the puppeteer's magical amulet, the source of his power, was ripped from his neck. As it shattered on the ground, a blinding light filled the tent, and I felt the last of the dark magic dissipate. The spell was broken. The audience fled in terror as they realized the true nature of what they had been watching. The police arrived shortly after, alerted by the commotion. The puppeteer was arrested, his crimes finally exposed to the world. In the aftermath, those of us who had been his puppets began the long process of recovery. The physical scars would heal, but the psychological trauma would take much longer to overcome. We formed a support group, finding solace in our shared experience and working together to rebuild our lives. As for me, I still have nightmares about those dark days. Sometimes I wake up in a cold sweat, convinced I can feel invisible strings tugging at my limbs. But then I remind myself that it's over, that we're free. And in those moments, I'm grateful for every movement I make of my own free will.